I just had a conversation with someone and I told her, I said, I think I'm going to have to record a quick podcast episode because I think the world needs to hear this. So I'll protect her privacy and I won't go into detail, but let's call this particular episode Seek the Truth. There was a unique situation. And again, I won't go into detail, but someone said something about her and she's a dear friend of mine that's been a friend of mine for many years. And she called me just to get some advice. And one of the first things I said to her, I said, first of all, I said, just be prepared because I'm about to throw a lot at you. I said, you're looking at someone for the last couple of weeks straight, not exaggerating, been spending a minimum of about 8 hours a day studying mindset, all about mindset, thinking patterns, success growth patterns. Why do we do the things we do? Why do we get easily distracted? Why do we get into such habitual behavior and things of that set? So I told her I've been knee deep, nothing but mindset development, really for myself and also, of course, to bring to the Unlocking Greatness community because we have phenomenal guest speakers. And I always want to make sure that we're taking things a notch higher with what they're learning. But anyway, let me get to the point. So I told her, I said, just get prepared. I said, because you're looking at someone for at least 8 hours a day, some days 10 hours. I have been soaking in mindset and understanding, going deeper into the conscious mindset, the subconscious mindset, understanding thinking patterns and the way we work. So anyway, she was starting off going into a story about, someone saying something. And again, I'll protect the details because I protect privacy. And you could tell she was really bothered by it. Now, this is a professional woman, married, kids, the whole 9 yards. I've known her for years. And I just, let her talk. And I said to her, I said, so imagine someone that that may have just called you a giraffe. And she's like, huh? And I says, just go there for a moment. I said, if someone just called you a giraffe, would that bother you? And she says, no. And I said, well, why would that not bother you? And she said, well, Z, that wouldn't bother me because I know I'm not a giraffe. And I said, are you sure? She says, yeah. I said, is there any element of that at all? That's true. Are you an animal? Are you, and she says, no, I'm not a giraffe. In fact, if somebody called me a giraffe, I would probably think, what's wrong with them? And I said, so that wouldn't bother you. You wouldn't be upset as you are now. And she says, no. And I says, okay. I said, that's interesting. I said, so imagine now that same person just said to you, and then I kind of repeated to her what she said this person had just said about her. And I says, does that bother you? And she said, okay, I get it. Yeah, it does bother me. And I says, why? And then she kind of went on to say, well, because, what she said is not true, what she was saying about me. And I said, but let's dig in this a little bit. And the whole point is, and the reason I'm titling this with Seek the Truth is, I said, it's interesting you call me at this time because I've been going so incredibly deep, not only for my own personal development, but also to be able to help others. I said, the question you need to be asking yourself is, what is it about myself that I believe to be true that is even allowing this to bother me? And she's like, Z, oh my goodness, that's a good point. I said, so just like if one person just called you a giraffe and you were adamant about that wouldn't bother you, you wouldn't be bothered, you wouldn't be stirred by it at all. I said, so what is the difference between some words, some different words that are basically spoken, if there's no element of it that you believe to be true? We can't stop what someone else may say about us, you guys. You know that. We can't stop it. My mother used to teach me, baby, people are going to talk about you when you're alive and they're going to talk about you when you're dead and gone. You may as well get used to it, right? So you can't control what comes out of someone else's mouth or what they think about you, right? But we get to respond how we wish to respond. We don't react to things. We get to respond. And I don't mean respond by saying something back. I mean, we have a choice. We get to decide how we're going to handle what just came to us. And so I said to her, I said, so let's just think about this for a second. Whatever this person said, and you already said that is not true. I said, but even if there was a level of it that was true, I said, what is it about you that you believe to be true that this would bother you? And I wish I can go into the details, but I can't. But what I said to her is, I said, again, I'm not a licensed psychiatrist that, I'm not sitting here trying to play the role of a therapist. I said, but let me just tell you what I've learned about myself. I said, I really think that you need to do some digging and to understand What is it about you, your past, what you believe about yourself that's making some element of this true? I'll just say this much because I know this person very well, so I feel comfortable saying this. I said, I think it has to do with some abandonment issues. I think it has to do with some, issues of, do you feel wanted? Do you feel accepted? Do you feel good enough? And again, I won't go through details, but I know a lot about, some things. And she just sat there and soaked it all in. And she said, it's so true. I said, there's deeper issues that you have to deal with concerning you, that someone else's words would get you to such a point of where you're feeling just like your whole day is just thrown off. And, and she was just beginning to spiral downward, and just in terms of some decision she was making. And again, I won't go into detail about that. And we just talked about that for just a moment. And then I took it a step deeper. I said, we tend to forget that Genesis 1:26 teaches us that God created us in his image. We tend to forget Romans 8, I believe it's verse 17, that teaches us that we are heirs of God. And we tend to look past these passages when we read in the Bible about Romans 12:2, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Ephesians 6, everything is spiritual. Now, these are some of the things I was just kind of throwing at her. And I said, what does that mean? We are literally made in the image of God. Our very words that we speak have power. So if our words we speak have power, that means even our thoughts have power. And then I talked to her a little bit about, the conscious and the subconscious mind. I said, what do you know about the conscious and the subconscious mind? And I just kind of, I don't even want to use the word educated, but I just talked to her a little bit about the conscious mind is sort of like the thinking part of your mind, right? Kind of like you all are listening to this podcast right now, right? Or you're reading a good book, that's teaching you some things about, yourself, or, you're learning, you're in a seminar, whatever. It's all of that thinking you're taking in. And I said, now think about the bottom part of your mind being like the subconscious mind. And you all know there are people like Dr. Maxwell Maltz and other people from way back in the day that's done a phenomenal job teaching on these subject matters. So I don't pretend to be an expert, but I've learned quite a big deal about the conscious and the subconscious mind. And I said, just think about that for a moment. I said, your subconscious mind is almost like a baby. It's going to take in every single thing that you feed it, whether it's true or not, whether it's real or not, right? That's why it's very good to visualize who you are, this person you're becoming, right? And I said, so if you think about it, I said, think about it like this. If everything is spiritual, which Ephesians 6 teaches us that. I says, think of your entire body almost just as like, spirit, of course, we are spirit. But I says, just think about energy, like your energy is just, vibrating on a certain level, right? And just think about anything you think, your thoughts you're putting out there, you're bringing those same thoughts back into your life, And for those of you who don't know, that's the law of attraction, right? Like attracts like. And I said, so we have to be so careful in the very things that we even think about, because we're attracting those same things into our lives. And I said, so think about the subconscious. Think about the lower part of your mind. Think about the subconscious for a moment. And I said, just think about this. If the subconscious doesn't know the difference between what's right, what's not, what's real and what's not, and you're feeding this baby and that's what's controlling all of your feelings and emotions, I said, are you aware you can't even be creative when you're in that negative, worry, anxious, self-doubt? You're in that mode. You can't even be creative. Now, there's some things that she's working on. That's some pretty major things she's doing. I won't go into detail, but she's a phenomenal, intelligent woman and running her own business and doing some things. I said, so think about this. I said, so someone has just brought some negative energy to you, right? Now we call it, a negative, evil spirit is what I call it, to be honest with you. But someone has just brought some negative energy in, right? All that is doing is just lowering you down, lowering your energy level down to a whole nother level where you can't even be creative. You can't even think about how you're going to grow your business. You can't think right now about how you're going to better your marriage or how you're going to, be a better mom or this or that. I said, because right now that energy that just came, those negative words from this person, you allowed that to just bring you down. And she says, you're so right. And I said, so what you got to be thinking about is this. What is it about myself I believe to be is true? Because I need to deal with that. And I need to pull those roots up. Because that subconscious part of our mind, you all, and I've learned a lot about this lately. And again, I do not proclaim to be an expert. Let me make it clear. But that subconscious part of our mind is something else. I mean, it holds things way back from our childhood, things we can't even hardly remember, right? Think about all the seeds that's been planted, right? Some of the things that I've been dealing with in walking through this process is making sure that I don't walk around with a scarcity mindset or poverty mindset, because that was my upbringing, right? No matter how well I did financially, I always still was in that scarcity mindset. Is it going to be taken away? Am I going to have enough? Right? And so those are weeds that have to be pulled up, and you have to replace that entire paradigm with a new one. But without going in all of that, because I said, I'm just sort of giving you a crash course. I said, what you want to be saying to yourself is, I'm not going to allow these new seeds that just began to be planted, right, in my mind, these seeds of negativity. I'm not going to allow these seeds to be here. I'm going to pull these up right now before it begins to develop even deeper roots, because I don't want to attract more of the same thing. I cannot afford to allow negativity in my life. Some people would say bringing your energy down or your vibration down. I call it a spiritual warfare, right? Ephesians 6:10-12 teaches us that everything is spiritual, against the rulers, the authorities, the principalities, and all of that. But anyway, so that's the name I put on it. But I know a lot of people put the name on it, frequency, vibration, whatever. Give it whatever name you want to give it. I give it the biblical name. So I call it spiritual attacks. But my point is, I said to her, I said, you're an amazing woman. You cannot allow or even afford to allow any outside force to throw you off from your level of creativity, your level of praying, your level of thinking. I said, you have got to look at that as, you know what, I've got to reject this. I don't even have time to dedicate to something that somebody out of their mouth said to me, especially if I know that it's not true. And I said, it's no different than if someone called you a giraffe. I said, in fact, you would even probably have compassion on that person, like something's got to be wrong with this person. And she's just like, oh my goodness, Z, you have no idea how this has helped me to stop in my track. I said, yeah. I said, think about it like this. I says, every single time you allow yourself to sit in that spiral where you're spiraling down, right? You're thinking about, I can't believe she said, then why would she say this about it? I said, just think about it like this. You are attracting the exact same thing into your life, because that's how powerful you are. As an heir of God, you're attracting the same thing. It may not come directly from that person, but it could be an unexpected bill. It could be somebody saying something about you on social media. I said, you get my point? You're attracting that same energy, that same vibration. I call it spirits, just so you know, because I like to use biblical terms, but you're attracting more of that negativity, those spirits, into your life. And I said, so you have to be really adamant about what is going to occupy that space, that sacred space within. You have to know who you are. And so we had a really, really, really good talk about it. She said, Z, you don't even understand how that's just literally reshaped the whole way that I'm evaluating this. And she's like, you're right. I can't control what comes out of someone else's mouth, but I definitely can control how I respond. And instead of sitting here and spiraling and trying to justify and, I don't know why she said this and she's wrong and I need to tell her this and da da da. I said, no, baby, we ain't got time for that. Who has time for that right now in their lives? Keep that energy high. In other words, stay in the spirit. Don't allow your creativity to come down. Don't allow your worship and prayer to start coming down because you're focusing on something negative that somebody out there don't say it. We don't have time for that. And she said, Z, you just really have no idea how that really helped me. And she said, the fact that you stated, what is it about myself that I believe to be true that even allows this to bother me? And then she started sharing some things, that she believes would, this is where this came from her past. And I won't go into detail about that because I really always like to respect people's privacy. But she shared some things. She said, I think I know where this is coming from. And I said, yes, baby, that's where you got to spend that time on. Why is this even bothering me? What is it about myself that I believe to be it's true that this even bothers me? And what do I need to do? What information do I even need to feed myself? I was explaining to her the importance of repetition, the importance of we have to constantly feed that subconscious, that lower part of our mind. I guess I can say it like that. But you have to feed it the truth. This is why I really believe the Bible teaches us to be joyful always, to pray continuously, the passage in the Bible that teaches us whatever is lovely, whatever is pure, whatever is admirable, think about such things. Romans 12:2, which teaches us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. This is why. Because we're constantly feeding that subconscious, like, no, 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 no. I know this is what it may look like on the outside, right? But this is how you are to feel. This is the emotions that you are to feel, because it's already happened in the spirit. So hopefully that makes sense. What I'm saying is that, and so I was explaining to her, I said, it's very important that you spend time feeding yourself the truth. What is the truth? Go into scriptures and dig up the truth about who God says we are, how we are protected, how he loves us. Get the truth about yourself. Let yourself know that you are whole all by yourself. Right? And I said, I said every morning, I says, one of the things I do, and I teach this inside of the Unlocking Greatness community. For those of you who are already going through the necessary retreat, you guys know we already talk about this stuff. And in fact, tomorrow we have 2 guest speakers that are joining our live workshop session. We have the amazing Olivia, the author of Caring for the Child Within. You guys remember her. She's going to be coming into the live workshop session tomorrow. And then Scott's coming back again. Scott is a mindset growth coach. I just love him tremendously. So we have 2 amazing guest speakers that's going to be joining us in the live workshop sessions tomorrow inside of the Unlocking Greatness community. But what I love about it is that these are the things that we talk about, because here's my prayer to God. I know I'm drifting a little bit. I lost my train of thought, but I want to say this. My prayer is for God to let his words come alive to me. In other words, bring the word of God, the very words in the Bible, bring it alive to me, that it's so in my spirit, and that I see it on such a different level that it makes sense. For example, I've been studying Matthew chapter 7, verse 7 through 11 or so, really for the last, it's been a while, like literally looking at that scripture over and over and over again. And that's the passage that teaches us about asking, it shall be given to you, seek, you'll find, knocking, the door be open. Now, you guys know I get a little weird around this time. This is the time of my anniversary of my son's death, which is coming up in just a couple of days. And so I shouldn't say weird. That's the wrong word. For me, each year, this is a year where I just kind of take a break from social media, a break from podcasting. I know it's been a while since you all have heard from me. And I really just focus on going deeper in my walk with God and sort of being on my own retreat. The very retreat that many people go through, the necessary retreat, which is based on my book, Necessary. I literally go on my own necessary retreat. So I've been in this mode. But anyway, I digress. Matthew 7:7, I've been studying a lot. What does it mean when the Bible is teaching us to ask and it shall be given to you? Seek and you shall find, knocking the door shall be open. And surely I've thought to myself, well, there's been many times I've asked and I didn't receive. And then Jesus goes on to say, which of you or your son asked for bread, we'll give him a stone or whatever. And I'm finally, and this is why I've been praying to God to bring his words alive. I'm finally beginning to feel and see the essence of what this is about. This is not about the words that literally come out of our mouths that we say, you guys. It's not about verbally just asking. It's what we really believe. What do we really believe about ourselves? Do we really believe in the promises of God? Let me take this a little deeper. When we ask, do we really believe that we will receive it? Like attracts like. Do you really believe that it's already been given to you? Now, some people would say, when the people that get into talking quite heavily about, your vibration level, your energy level, that you attract these things to you. And many of you all have read some books on that. I know a lot of people know Napoleon Hill, and I think he's the author of Think and Grow Rich. And there's just a whole lot of books out there on this subject matter where they go deep, deep, deep into it. But I'm scratching the surface of it just to make a point, is when we ask, do we really believe that we will receive it? And what Jesus is saying in that passage is that ask and it shall be given to you. And I thought, oh my God, our thoughts and beliefs are so powerful. We attract to us, we receive what it is we really believe that we will receive. It's not so much the words that come out of our mouth. That's just kind of saying something. But it's, do you really believe it? Do you really believe it? And so she and I know I'm going deeper. Maybe that'll be a whole nother podcast episode. I think I'm going to do an entire podcast episode just on Matthew 7:7. because that'll take me down another road right now if I go deeper into that subject matter. But that's the thought pattern that I've been in lately, is like, oh my God, it's as if my eyes are starting to open wider and I'm beginning to see, not just in my personal life, in business as well. It's a whole nother subject for those of you who are entrepreneurs. Whole nother subject. We've had some phenomenal entrepreneur workshops inside of the Unlocking Greatness community, and I can't wait till we have our next live workshop session. But we're going to go deeper into that. But anyway, when you ask, it's not verbalizing the words. Is what do you really believe? Because that's what you're attracted into your life. That's what you're attracting. So let me get back to the subject with her. So I kind of rounded it up with that. I kind of brought that scripture to mind as well, and I said, so just think about this. I says, the more you think about what this person said and that negativity, just know, I said, if there's two things I want you to walk away from with this conversation, is one, I want you to walk away with the thought pattern of, what do I really believe about myself to be true, that I'm even allowing this to bother me? And I says, two, I says, think about this. The more you concentrate, because you're just that powerful in the spirit, you are an heir of God. And I went over several passages with her. I even went into Revelations with her on a couple of things. Revelations 1:6, Revelations 5:10, a couple other passages. I said, the more you think about that, because you're just that powerful, you are attracting more of that into your life. Whatever you ask for, you're going to receive it. Whatever you're seeking, if that's where your thoughts choose, the direction your thoughts choose to go into, you choose to sit and worry all day about this situation, or about bills or finances, or about, whatever, anything negative going on, guess what? You're attracting more of the same thing into your life, because you're just that powerful. That's why we have to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, my dear brothers and sisters. That's why we have to be joyful always. That's why we have to pray continuously. That's why we have to be very careful with who gets our time and attention. That's why you got to be careful with what you listen to, what you watch, the company you keep, the words you're allowing to come into your conscious mind, right? Because that's feeding right on into your subconscious. And when your subconscious start feeling and believing that stuff, guess what? For those of you who are in the field of psychology, you already know what I'm going to say. Your actions are going to follow that same level of vibration, energy, spirit, belief, whatever you want to call it. Your actions are going to follow. And when your actions follow, that's where your results are going to come from. So if you don't want to keep producing the same results in your life, then you need to be very careful with even starting with your thoughts. What are you studying? What are you learning? What are you bringing into your mind? What are you believing? What are you feeling? How is that followed by your actions, and what are you doing? Anyway, I went off track just a little bit, but those are some of the things that I talked to her about. I want to encourage you all, seek the truth. Seek the truth. You have to. I've been dedicating hours and hours and hours a day, growing in my walk with God, being still, learning more and more about mindset development, not just for myself, but just so that I can help others, because I want the word of God to come alive in our lives. We are living epistles. Our lives, every area of our lives, I know I'm going off track a minute, but just let me say this. Every area of your life needs to be a living representation of who Christ is. Every area. I'm not talking just spiritual, personal, financial. Every area of your life needs to be a living representation. So if Jesus is telling me, asking it shall be given to you, seeking you'll find, knocking the door, and the door will be open, don't you think we need to spend some time studying and understanding what is this all about? If we're taught that we need to have a renewing of our mindset, don't you think we need to spend time understanding what is this all about? So I love you all. I'm going to close out this podcast episode. I think I'm going to call it Seek the Truth. I pray that you all are taking good care of yourselves. If you all are not into a good mentorship program, whether it's for personal or business development, I strongly encourage you all to get into one right away. The Unlocking Greatness community is wide open. We welcome you with open arms. I love them so much. We have literally become a family at this point. It is the most amazing community of people seeking personal and entrepreneurial growth, and the testimony, especially some of the recent video testimonies many of the members have given, have literally had me in tears. One of them said, she said, Z, I've been in so many business programs and, coaching services, because just about everybody and their mother has one today. And she said, and only now have things really taken off and changed, not only for me, but in my business. And she said, it's all about proximity. She says, it's just proximity, it's being in the right environment and with the right people. And that really touched my heart. It really did. But I love you all. Always seek out getting some good help, some mentorship, the help that you all may need. Most importantly, dive deeply into the Word of God and ask God to show you the truth. Okay? I love you all. Keep me in prayer during this time. As you guys know, the anniversary of my son's death is just a couple of days away. And this is one of those moments where, for a couple of weeks, I just kind of get off to myself. And it's just one of those moments of just growing. And I love you all. I love you. I love you. I pray this has encouraged you all. I wasn't planning on recording a podcast episode right now, and I'm recording from home on my mic right now, so I apologize if the sound quality is not as great as it normally is. But I love you all. You're listening to Unlocking Greatness Podcast with Zenja Glass. Be encouraged.